On everybody, it is your boy Gsluke here with our Thursday night football live stream for the game between the Dolphins and Bengals. A little fiery matchup, right? Two teams that have high-powered offenses. We got some of the technical difficulties from last time ironed out. That's what I was doing there before stream. Why we're a little bit late here, but now I'll be able to see all of your comments down in chat. I won't have to bring up my phone on the side, that sort of thing, and it'll be running a little bit more smoothly this time. So let's go ahead and get this thing rocking. And we'll start with a little look at the game script, where the lines have moved throughout the week. But most importantly, I want to talk about a few of the injury situations. So the total hasn't moved all that much. It went up a little bit from the 47-point total. It's at 48.5 now. So with Tua being rolled in, Jalen Waddle being expected to play, you saw a little bit of action on the over there, and Vegas had to adjust for it. And the spread went from a 4-point spread to a 3.5 spread for the Bengals. So it's still relatively close game. A lot of the sharp action is on the Bengals. I believe 80% of the money in Vegas is on the Bengals, beside only with like 65% of the actual total amount of slips on the Bengals side. So you can see that a lot of the higher dollar slips are on the Bengals, which makes sense. They're favorites. You have to bet more on the Bengals to win more money. Anytime you see something like an 80-20 split with the money on one team versus the other, that's a sign of a lot of the big whales, a lot of the sharper action coming in. So I definitely tend to agree with that. I said that there on Tuesday when we came out with that preview, that the Bengals probably a good 4.5 point favorite here. It's 3.5 at books, so I actually probably would take that number, but this isn't a betting show. More importantly, we've got to talk about our stacks, because tonight for every primetime game, everyone wants to hype it up to be this close game, right? And you see it time and time again. Everyone thinks it's going to be a high-scoring, close game, because that's what we want as a fan. We want to see a competitive game that comes down to the wire, plenty of fantasy points so that our props hit in fantasy, that we're scoring 20 to 25 points with a lot of our players. But in reality, that sort of outcome is just as rare as something like a 7-3 game. So we have to keep in mind that this fantasy la-la land that a lot of us try to live in probably isn't going to happen in reality. So when we look at these totals, we look at the over-under, all that sort of fun stuff. Just keep in mind that even if it's going to be over a 48-point total, this could be dominated by one team or the other, right? It doesn't have to be a competitive game. And once again, just like plenty of the primetime slates to this point, everyone's going to play it tonight like it's going to be a competitive game, that these quarterbacks are going to go off, right? It's Tua versus Burrow, right? Two quarterbacks from that same draft class that were drafted there in the first round. They're gonna have to go back and forth, right? They're going to be competitive, so on and so forth, blah, 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 blah. You're going to hear every narrative humanly imaginable tonight. And I think just like the last slate, the clear way to differentiate yourself is to just take an onslaught of one team versus the other, right? And honestly, my preferred team is the Bengals, right? I talked about that early in the week. I think that they're the deserving favorite. But if you wanted to get really unique about it, stack in a 4-2 or a 5-1 fashion with the Dolphins. Take their defense, maybe even stack the running back with their defense. That's always a good onslaught stack. Those sort of lineups, I mean, we're going to get into the player pool a little bit later, or what I slightly prefer here, just from the overall perspective. In terms of injuries, I mentioned that Tua is going to play, same thing with Jalen Waddle. We'll get an actual report on that probably over the next hour here, but both are expected to be active. Maybe a little bit more interesting is Cedric Wilson Jr. Now, I've tried to do a little bit of digging on it. I can't really figure out whether he's going to be active or not. He's a cheap option, the pseudo wide receiver 3 for this Dolphins team. And if he's out, you could see Trent Sherfield get a few more touches, or they might just, as a replacement of running 3 wide receiver sets, run a lot more 2 tight end sets. So it's something to keep an eye on. The 2 studs for the Dolphins should be active, but if Cedric Wilson Jr. ends up sitting, could be a piece of value to look out for. On the Bengals side, not really anything that's fantasy relevant. A bunch of defenders, a few O-linemen like Lael Collins, that's going to be questionable game time decision. Nothing to really worry about from the fantasy perspective. So really, we know that Tua and Waddle are going to be out there and active. It's pretty much all coming down to Cedric Wilson Jr. Now we can look at the weather, which is going to be a little bit chilly tonight. There you can see it's in the 50s there in Cincinnati, but not dealing with much wind at all. If we go ahead and bring this up here, you can see 6 to 7 miles an hour at 9, right around kickoff, that's 8 p.m., 7 to 8 miles an hour. And if it goes late into the night, you're still looking at only 5 to 6 miles an hour. So it's pretty much like they're playing in a dome. It'll be a little bit chilly out there. Nothing that's going to affect play, though. Let's hop over to the player pool now, start to talk through some of the decisions to be made on the board. And I'll remind you guys, as per usual, with all of my projections, if you're looking for access to all of them, they are on the Patreon page. So you'll see on here, we're going to have our projected points on here, all that sort of fun stuff. But if you're looking for ownership numbers, whether guys are in my player pool, all that sort of fun stuff, all of that is on the Patreon. And if you're on there, feel free to go ahead and follow along on there, because obviously it'll be a little bit more valuable if you know the ownership numbers and, of course, whether I'm actually playing them or not. So let's talk through every player here. On Showdown, right, there's only 20 to 25 players that are even playable. So we could pretty much talk about everyone on the slate. So at the top of the board, Ja'Marr Chase, 11 grand. He's going to be relatively chalky, but you'd be surprised he's not the highest owned player on the slate. I think a lot of that comes down to price tag. He is a little bit more expensive than you'd like him to be. There at 11 grand. He still projects rather nicely, right? 19.7 points. Isn't jumping off the board like somebody like a Joe Burrow at his price tag. But still, if you're not playing Ja'Marr Chase tonight, you're not going to feel that comfortable about it, right? You're going to know that he's got that 40, 50-yard touchdown in him. But if you do fade Ja'Marr Chase tonight and he goes out there and he lays an egg, you're sitting on a gold mine, right? He's at least 40% owned. I'll give you that at the very least, right? I'm not going to give you the exact number on him. At the captain slot, I believe he's over 10% owned as well. Yeah, by the way, if you have the sheet up, right, you can check the exact numbers on there. But he's significantly owned in both categories, that's for sure. So you're going to have to make a decision on it, right? He's a piece of chalk. And a lot of times in Showdown, chalk hits. A lot of times the highest owned players are for good reason, particularly when they're quarterbacks, high usage running backs. But the one thing you could say about Ja'Marr Chase is that he's big play dependent, right? He's volatile. And to this point, he hasn't really hit this season. I mean, outside of week 1, weeks 2 and 3 were a little bit disappointing for Ja'Marr Chase. So you could argue that he's due at this point, or you could argue that that's a great example of him going out there and busting and paying off the people that are fading him. So something to consider there. I personally think he's going to get plenty of touches. If I'm playing a Bengals heavy stack with the majority of my lineups, which I'm going to be doing for tonight, he's going to have to be a piece of my player pool. I'm going to have to play him at captain, because in a Bengals onslaught, he is by far the most likely player to be in an optimal captain. I mean, he's going to get, in a positive game script, in a game that they're productive, 7 to 10 targets. He's extremely efficient when he gets targets, particularly when they're going out there in the red zone. I mean, who else would you take, right? T. Higgins has a similar type of ceiling. We're going to talk about him a little bit later. Joe Mixon, if you're assuming that he gets a bunch of rushing touchdown, that sort of production, he could be your optimal captain, or Joe Burrow, right? And out of all of those options, I mean, I'd say probably Ja'Marr Chase is the most likely captain out of the bunch. Joe Burrow is probably number 2, 3, and 4. In terms of the pricing, I think it's pretty appropriate when it comes to their actual optimal percentages. So you have to pay up for Chase if you want to take him. I think it makes quite a bit of sense. If you're playing a Bengals onslaught, I probably wouldn't fade him. I don't know. If you're single entry 2 to 3 max, right, you can fade anybody, right? But if you're playing 20 to 150 lineups, it's a little bit of a different prospect, right? So that's what I'm thinking for tonight. I think Ja'Marr Chase makes plenty of sense. I'm not going to talk about everything through how I'm playing, by the way, just to give you guys an idea here. I'm going to give you the full broad idea, right? The perspective behind every single player, right? Whether I'm playing them, whether I like them or not, going to give you the pros and cons for every single player. Next up, we've got Tyreek Hill, where the pros definitely outweigh the cons here. He's going against Eli Apple, who's one of the worst cornerbacks in all of the NFL. Also dealing with a banged up Waddle. I mean, though Tua is also banged up himself, he should demand an even larger target share there on the Dolphins. He's been extremely efficient. They've had set up rushes for Tyreek Hill, a bunch of set up screens set up for him in that Mike McDaniels offense. And overall, especially with Jalen Waddle a little bit banged up, I mean, he projects off the board, right? 17.7 points right there. Somebody who, if you're taking a Dolphins heavy stack, has to be a part of that your player pool, kind of like a Ja'Marr Chase, right? He's by far the most likely player to get into the optimal lineup, because it's $16,200. You can still make a competitive lineup around him, particularly because both quarterbacks that are there in the 9K range, they're not 10K plus. You have plenty of guys in the 4 and 5K range, which we'll talk about later, like a Gesicki. That's going to be a decent play tonight. Even Raheem Mostert, right, projecting for 9 points. And because it's supposed to be a 48.5 point total game, right, even the kickers like McPherson and Jason Sanders are projecting for pretty decent points per dollar value. So you're going to have plenty of guys down low that you can take. So guys like a Tyreek Hill and Ja'Marr Chase that have that legitimate 30, 35 point ceiling, just dominate the captain optimal percentages. So I love Tyreek Hill there, especially if you're going with a Dolphins heavy stack. But if you're playing with a Bengals mindset like I am, right, going with a little bit of a heavier Bengals influence, Tyreek Hill's more of a buyback, right? More of a 4-2 sort of setup, or even in a 5-1 using Tyreek Hill. And I wouldn't even be against using a 5-1 Bengals stack with Tyreek Hill at captain. We've seen that sort of lineup take down GPPs before. So I'm actually probably going to roll out a few tonight. Just him as a buyback, hoping that he's dominating that offense. Maybe Jalen Waddle is more banged up than he's leading on at this point, and he goes out there, he gets you that 35-point ceiling that we're looking for at $10,800. And the reason why I say that that's still viable tonight is Jamar Chase has to deal with T. Higgins. He's got to deal with guys like Tyler Boyd, Hayden Hurst at tight end, getting a few targets, stealing some of that red zone usage. If Jalen Waddle is down, it's Tyreek Hill. Then you have Mike Gesicki, who's been, mediocre at best to this point of the year. A few other guys that just are very unimpressive over there on that offense. It's a little bit of a different set of calculus there. That's why I think Tyreek Hill, even in a Bengals heavy stack, you could still play at captain. I think he's going to get that large of a target share tonight. Going on to Jalen Waddle, I think that he's kind of an X factor. I expected him to be extremely high owned to start the week, but now he's kind of trending downwards. Now closer to right around 35% ownership. He was closer to 40, 45 in my first run on Tuesday. At this point, I think it's because of injury. I tend to agree with it too, right? My sentiment on Waddle has kind of weakened throughout the week, as you've kind of heard that the injury's been hampering him quite a bit. $10,200 projects for 15.2 points. I think some of the usage that he typically gets may funnel to guys like a Tyreek Hill, Mike Gesicki, even the backfield. Guys like a Chase Edmonds, Raheem Mostert, I think might get a few more targets out of the backfield. So Waddle, probably a little bit too expensive here. Might end up being a complete fade for me. But if you were going with a Dolphins heavy stack, I wouldn't avoid him. He's still a top-level talent. He played last year, banged up a few times, was still wildly efficient, because I remember fading him last year for a few main slates because he was coming into the week questionable, was a game-time decision marked active the day of the game, and then went out there and I believe scored 25 to 30 fantasy points, and no one was on him. Nobody wanted to play him that week, and I don't know. That's probably not indicative of what's going to happen every single time. But he's shown that ability before, right, to tough it out and have a productive day. Now, it was without Tyreek Hill. Again, completely different situation. But yeah, you get the point there. So I wouldn't just completely avoid him, particularly if I was going with a Dolphins heavy stack. But just giving you, a little bit of perspective here with what I'm doing, right? If I'm going with a Bengals heavy stack, I'm going to prefer Tyreek Hill over Jalen Waddle pretty much all day. It's going to be really hard for me to want to take Jalen Waddle. Both quarterbacks make quite a bit of sense. I'm actually just going to lump them in together because they project pretty much on the same sort of level. Obviously, my projections are favoring the Bengals here, so you can see there's about a 4-point difference there. But depending on the type of simulation that you're running, it's almost all dependent on who's actually winning this game, right? It's a lot closer than this 4-point spread indicates. It's not like Joe Burrow's getting to his ceiling 20 to 30% more than a Tua Tagovailoa. It's like a 55-45 split. They're a lot closer than people are really giving them credit for. And that's why, even though I'm taking a Bengals heavy stack this week, which is kind of chalky, a lot of people are kind of coming around on that. I thought that maybe the Dolphins would get a little bit of attention. I think that some of the injuries are keeping people off of them, but that's not enough to make me completely flip switch, because you're still getting enough ownership on the Dolphins team where the Bengals, just to give you an idea, right, in terms of ownership, there's a 12% difference between Burrow and Tagovailoa. I'm just going to call him Tua. I cannot say his last name. I'm not even going to try. Between Burrow and Tua here, if there's only a 12, maybe 15% difference in terms of their ownership, and there's only a 10% difference in teams of their optimal rate, they're pretty much the same play, right? And if you're talking about somebody that's pretty much the same play, just take the quarterback of the team that you think is going to win. Now, if you want to try and take both of them together, that's certainly possible. It's just going to make you extremely chalky. And that's the real reason I don't like playing both quarterbacks together. It's not that it's suboptimal. It's not that it uses so much salary that's going to bring in a lot of opportunity costs with taking guys like a Tyreek Hill or Jamar Chase at captain. You can certainly still play one of them at captain and get to both quarterbacks. It's just that you're going to be unbelievably chalky, unbelievably duplicated. I mean, just think about it, right? You start with, let's say, Tyreek Hill at captain. You take both quarterbacks here. With those 3 plays, first off, you're using, I don't know, a solid 3/4 of your salary, maybe a little bit more than that in reality. And then when you actually go to build your lineup, you're what, on a 3-on-3 with the rest of your field, all trying to take value options here. And if you take all of the chalky value options, I can guarantee that you're going to duplicate yourself with like $100 to $200 people. So that's the issue with taking both quarterbacks. Whereas, let's say you start a lineup with, let's say same thing, Tyreek Hill. But let's go with Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase rather than taking a Tua there. Sure, you're still getting somebody in Jamar Chase that's pretty much like the same level of ownership as somebody like a Tua, but people just jam in these quarterbacks. And in terms of like an average lineup construction, if we, excuse me, guys, if we start, with 2 players on the Bengals, 1 from the Dolphins, rather than, going with a 2-on-2, or I don't know. Let me go over the Draftkings just so you guys an idea. Because we're going to talk through the rest of the player pool, but I want to talk through this lineup construction because it's an important thing to talk about, especially right now. So let me share my screen, boys. When we're talking about duplicating ourselves with other people, let me show you what taking both quarterbacks together will do. So first off, let's go ahead and take Jamar Chase at captain. It's irrelevant who's their captain, right? It's more about the players that we're combining with them. Let's take both of the quarterbacks here. And first off, really limits your salary, right? You're down to right around $5,000 per left. Sorry, $5,000 per spot remaining for a player. But you have 3 spots remaining, and we need to pair up a wide receiver with Tua. We know that for a fact, right? He's not going to get to his ceiling unless a wide receiver is also putting up production. So going out there, our choices are probably Tyreek Hill. Again, Jalen Waddle is just not my favorite play on the slate. Or you could go down to one of these cheaper options, which we're going to have to do because we're down to $5,000 remaining per player, and take like a Cinci, right? So at this point, we have a 2-2. And likely, we don't just want 1 wide receiver on each team, right? We probably want to add another skill position player for each team, take a 3-3. So it kind of forces you into a 3-3. Now, you could take a 4-2. Right, we could take 2 more players from the same team here, but the natural inclination, because we're looking to try and correlate ourselves with the rest of our lineup here, is to try and take a 3-3 lineup, right? And if we're doing so, we're left with $4,700 remaining per spot. We're just going to get to chalky plays like a Hayden Hurst, right? He'll be our 3rd player from the Bengals. If we're looking for a 3rd player from the Dolphins now, it's like, Durham Smythe at $2,800. Oh, maybe I'll take a kicker, right? So, even if you were to get to an Evan McPherson here, right? Try to take a 4-2, make it a little bit more correlated towards the Bengals. I don't love this lineup, and I can almost guarantee you this would be duplicated 10, 20 times in the large field GPP. And the large 20 max probably duplicated like 40, 50 times because of how many entries are in that contest. I don't know. A real simple way to fix this. And it's this simple to try and get a little bit different here. It'd go to take this, right? It's a 5-1 lineup, right? So it's a little bit more correlated towards the Bengals. And because we only have Mike Gesicki as a buyback here, this lineup is going to have maybe 5 times the chance of being unique because people aren't comfortable taking 5-1 stacks. Again, it's a primetime game. They all want to live in La La Land, assuming that it's going to be a high-scoring competitive game. Everyone plays Showdown like the game's going to be a high-scoring competitive game. That's just something that all the fish do. In the large field GPPs, I'd say 30, 40% of entries that are entered with that exact script in mind. And that script happens. Again, I'm going to say this time and time again. I've said it multiple times during the stream already. That happens like 5, 10% of the time at most. It's a fringe outcome to have that shootout sort of outcome. So we want to completely pivot off of that when we can, if possible. Sure, you're going to get a close competitive game sometimes, from time to time. It's just not nearly as often as people play it. So that's typically why it's a plus EV move to go ahead and pivot off of it. So got the screen back up here. Let's go ahead and catch up on chat, see what's going on. You have Colin says Hurst to love. Yeah, I like him, especially because I'm on the Bengals side. Yeah, we'll talk about him later. What's going on, Robert? Hopefully you're doing well, bro. Bridge says you're the GOAT because you speak facts. Good luck to you. Yeah, good luck to you too, bro. Yeah, I tried to be a straight shooter over here. I appreciate it. Jones says only thoughts on Jamar Chase for tonight. What do you mean only thoughts on Jamar Chase? I'm not a big fan of Jamar Chase as a super chalky pick, but if you're taking a Bengal stack, you got to take him. So not sure what you're saying there. And Bridge says, I'm going to call you Luke the Legend. Hey, you can call me whatever you want. I got Grand Slam Luke. You can call me Luke, right? You can call me Luke the Legend, whatever you want to call me, boss, man. But let's go ahead and move this on. So I talked about some of the top tier options here. We talked about why I like both quarterbacks, right? So I want to get that out there in the blue. And I don't like taking both quarterbacks together. So it could be optimal. Sure, but it really puts you in a corner when you're trying to make unique lineups. And if you're just building lineups, right, especially if you're building them in an optimizer, if you set a rule not to play Joe Burrow and Tua together, I don't want to say that's going to make you unique like by yourself, because it's certainly not, right? You're still going to have pivots in your lineups. You might want to set a max total ownership across your entire lineup, that sort of thing, a total, what is it, multiplicated, wow, can't even say it, multiplicative ownership there. You want to set those sort of metrics, right? But if you set that kind of group to not play those two quarterbacks together, it's also going to help you a lot with being unique. Do you like Joe Mixon? Anytime you have one of these games where you have two top tier quarterbacks, the running backs from both teams get underutilized. Again, people live in La La Land. They want this to be a 40 to 35 point game. They want it to be like a 70-point total. They want all of their props to hit. That's why they're watching the game with that sort of mindset. So guys like Joe Mixon, probably going to be lower owned than they should be. Chase Edmonds, Raheem Mostert down here. And I know, only projecting for 4 fantasy points. So if you're playing in a season-long league, you're like, why the heck would you want to play Raheem Mostert, right? This is Showdown, right? There's a thing called the salary cap that we have to worry about, and a thing called ownership and variance, right? That happens. If he scores 2 touchdowns tonight, or even if he just scores 1 touchdown, gets his 4 or 5 catches, could still get to an optimal lineup. So like, I know if there's anyone in here that's new to DFS, new to Showdown, that sort of thing, just keep in mind this is a different ball game, right? So we're going to have to play guys like Raheem Mostert. We're going to have to go down there, play Durham Smythe every once in a while. I mean, heck, even Cedric Wilson Jr., if he's active for tonight, if he's not, Trent Sherfield might end up being that guy for the Dolphins. There's a lot of ugly plays that we're going to have to get to. But Joe Mixon, also probably going to be a little bit overlooked because of all the love to these quarterbacks. So I love that. Let me see what his ownership's at. So 1 second here, boys. I'm going to bring it up on the other tab here, because I can't bring it up on this tab here, or else you'll see it on here. And of course, boys, I got to keep something behind the paywall for the boys that are paying over there. But let's see what's going on. 1 second. All right. So Joe Mixon at this point, I have owned relatively comparable to some of the quarterbacks, which is, it's interesting, right? But at the captain position, in terms of optimal percentage, I have him about 3% higher owned than a Tua, but nearly twice as optimal as somebody like a Tua. So that's interesting, right? So he's being higher owned, but it's all about the optimal percentages for me. That's why a lot of my lineups are getting to him at this point. And if he's going to be the same level of ownership as somebody that has a higher optimal percentage, I mean, that's the definition of getting to a solid play. Let's move on to the value tier. Samaje Perine, I think, is just a fringe option. You're hoping he gets you that long touchdown. T. Higgins, kind of similar to a Jamar Chase there, where he's getting a lot of ownership, but I think it's well warranted. If you're playing a Bengals heavy stack, you're going to have to get to him probably at captain and at the flex position. So I like him in stacks with the Joe Burrow. Even going with the Jamar Chase, Burrow, and a Higgins stack, I think makes quite a bit of sense. And if you're going to start a lineup with the Bengals without Jamar Chase, then I think T. Higgins is almost a must play, right? I think that Jamar Chase or T. Higgins, if you're assuming that Joe Burrow has a ceiling game, at least one of them is also going to be in that optimal lineup, right? So in my builds tonight, I'm either going to have Jamar Chase or T. Higgins in every single lineup, but I will have lineups with them together as well. So it's not going to be a thing where it's like one or the other. It's just going to be a rule to make sure that I have at least one of them in every single lineup that I'm playing with a Joe Burrow. I do like T. Higgins there at captain. We talked about that. He's also cheaper. So that's something to mention here too, right? He's only $12,300 at captain. So by taking him, it opens up a little bit more salary relief. And if you're trying to leave a little bit of salary on the table, by starting with a guy in this 12K range, or even down here closer to $10,000, it makes that a little bit easier to accomplish without taking pure punts, right? Without going down here to a Salvin Ahmed, hoping that he vultures a touchdown, and Alec Ingold, hoping that he scores on the goal line, or a Trent Sherfield or a Cedric Wilson Jr. that might get wide receiver 3 targets for the Dolphins. You can still take guys that are a little bit more realistic, right? You can take the kickers, defenses, so on and so forth, and still leave a little bit of room on the table to be unique. So that's part of the utility of getting to a T. Higgins. It gives you a lower ownership at captain than somebody like a Jamar Chase, but it also gives you a little bit more flexibility with the rest of your lineup there. In terms of actual value options, I mean, Tyler Boyd, wide receiver 3, I think that he's a little bit overpriced. I mean, he probably should be $5,500, maybe $5,000 on the slate. So that's lowering his ownership level, but it's still significant enough at this point to keep me a little bit timid on getting to a good old Tyler Boyd. So $10,400. I understand the play. I just don't personally love it. I like guys like a T. Higgins a little bit more. I definitely like Jamar Chase and their target shares a lot more than what Tyler Boyd is going to see. But he did have a productive week 3, or I should say, week 3 there. So there's a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel, but I think he's overpriced at this point. And based on the target shares that I'm projecting for and I'm using in my simulations, isn't going to be nearly as optimal at captain to justify playing him there. So I have him at flex. I'm not going to have him at captain. Chase Edmonds, $6,200. We were promised that Edmonds was going to be this receiving back, that McDaniel was going to use him out of the backfield, kind of like a Deebo Samuel, maybe even put Chase Edmonds in the slot like we've seen for, Deebo Samuel, obviously when he's playing wide receiver. He's completely fallen short of that, right? He's been underutilized, has not seen many targets out of the backfield. So he's cheaper at this point. He's also lower owned than he would be if he was coming in with any sort of form. So for me, I understand the play. If you're taking a Dolphins heavy stack, I like him a little bit more. But even in a Bengals heavy lineup, I understand taking Chase Edmonds, assuming that he's being utilized out of the backfield, right? That they figure it out. They start to give him a few targets there. I think it's possible. So I don't want to completely abandon ship there. But a lot of people right now are treating Chase Edmonds like he's dead in the water, like he's going to be a bust for this year. A lot of people invested draft capital into him in their fantasy lineups this year. And I understand the hate, right? He hasn't had a very good start to the season, but don't be surprised if he goes out there, he has a pretty good game sooner rather than later. So I'm still going to take Chase Edmonds, even though I do favor the Bengals. Hayden Hurst, lovely at $5,400. He's cheap enough. He's gotten plenty of targets over the first few weeks, so you like to see that. A lot more targets than Mike Gesicki. He's not getting targeted for shit. So he's $5,000. He's a lot more expensive than he should be based on the target loads over the first few weeks. Obviously, I don't completely overreact to a 3-week sample size, but it's a part of my process where I have to take the workloads from the first few weeks to try and project what's going to happen in week 4. And it's really starting to bleed into his projection. In fact, at this point, I have him projected for 5.4 points, which is kind of glaring. I mean, last year he was a productive tight end right before he got injured. He wasn't available all the time, but when he was on the field, red zone threat, high pointing the ball, you loved what you were seeing. I expect a lot more from him. So it's kind of just be holding on to that hope there. But the projections, a lot of the numbers speak a grim story about Mike Gesicki. It would not be a play by the numbers here. This is more of a gut feeling sort of thing. I think he's still got it in him. I think he's going to get 4 or 5 targets tonight. Hopefully one of them, maybe even a few of them are in the end zone for touchdowns. That is his route to the optimal. He's not going to go out there, get you 8 catches and 80 yards anymore, right? He's not getting targeted like that. And perhaps health has a lot to do with why Mike Gesicki is struggling. Raheem Mostert, I love him too. I have to say, between him and Chase Edmonds, it's hard to tell who's going to be that running back tonight. I think they have pretty much a 50-50 chance of getting there. Raheem Mostert is cheaper. He's also pretty much the same ownership as a Chase Edmonds. I think Raheem Mostert might be a little bit higher owned when it comes to lock a little bit later. But at the same time, both players make quite a bit of sense to me. I'm not going to use them together, particularly because I'm going with a Bengals heavy lineup. But if you were going with a Dolphins stack, and I always say this about 2, especially with a handcuff situation, like what we have here in Miami, if you're going with a Dolphins heavy stack, that lineup using both running backs is a lot more optimal than you think. You've seen it at least 10 times over the last 2 seasons. I can remember off the top of my head, 2 running back lineups from the same team being optimal. And all that really has to happen, right, is Mostert scores a touchdown. Maybe Chase Edmonds gets it all done on the ground, ends up getting you like 13 to 14 raw points between his receptions and his yardage. And Raheem Mostert scores a touchdown and gets you like 30 yards. That might be optimal, right? Like 13 points from Edmonds, 9, 10 points from Mostert. If it's a low-scoring game and you're taking a Dolphins onslaught lineup, which is kind of what that indicates, right, that the Bengals aren't putting up much fantasy production at all, 2 running back sets for the Dolphins are more than viable, particularly because they're both super cheap. It's not like one of them's $10,000. It has to score you 25 points. Legitimately, 15 and 10 points from Edmonds and Mostert. If you could tell me that they were going to score 15 and 10 points right now, I would lock them into like almost every lineup. I'd be like, okay, Edmonds, Mostert, especially if I was all on the Dolphins tonight, I'd just take them both in every lineup together. Like that's a thing that can happen. And I've heard people out there saying that that's something that just can't happen. It happens all the time, like all the time when we play Showdown, like multiple times in the next month or two, it'll probably be in the optimal lineup. So just keep an eye on that, boys, particularly if you're in a smaller field sort of contest. CJ says, what is ownership looking like for Hayden Hurst? Okay, I'll take a look. 1 second here. I'm going to give you a rough idea, right? I can't give you the exact number, but I'll give you a rough idea. I know that he wasn't super chalky. I think a lot of that is because people don't love playing those tight ends, right? They want to spend up, take a Waddle when they can, take a Tyreek Hill up top when they're able to take those top tier options. But let's see, let's give you a general idea. So Hayden Hurst, yeah, I have him in the green. So I have it color coded on my sheet to give a little bit of color coordination. He's in the green. He's a sub 20% ownership. And normally when somebody in that value range is sub 20%, that's when I have them highlighted as green because that's a pretty solid value. Those sort of players, particularly somebody like a Hayden Hurst, Gesicki, Mostert, and Edmonds, when they're going to be sub 20% owned, which not all of them are, right? Hayden Hurst, first off, just Chase Edmonds isn't sub 20%. Neither is Tyler Boyd. But when they're sub 20%, it's really easy for them to get over that in terms of their optimal percentage, particularly somebody that's used as much as Hayden Hurst. Let's catch up on chat. Let's see what else is going on. Sway says, getting close to hitting that Riley first round leader. Oh, I got to check on golf real quick, boys. Thank you for the little reminder there. Yeah, I bet on Davis Riley this week. So that'd be nice to see. Oh, -6. Okay. Love to see it. What did Burnsy finish at? Did he finish at -2 or -1? -2. Okay, a little bogey free round for Sam Burns today. Yeah, I only played 50% Sam Burns, right? So I had to check on that. But yeah, good old Davis Riley going off. We love to see it too. I played a shit ton of him in my lineup. So pretty solid start on the golf side. Again, this isn't a golf stream, so I'm not going to talk about it very much. We are going to have a golf stream later on, actually, talking about Showdown for round 2. So if golf's your thing, we will be going live later. I'm not sure what time because Thursday Night Football is going to be on. I'm assuming most of you are going to be watching that. So probably going to wait until afterwards to go live. But yeah, that'll be later on. Thomas says, would you ever play 2 defenses? Oh, now that's taking it too far, right? So the 2 running back thing makes sense. That's sustainable, particularly because they're on the same team, right? Like if you're kicking ass, right, you're winning 35-49-17 or something like that, you might give your starting running back a little bit of rest, right? Let the backup running back get run. There's a lot of different opportunities, right, for both running backs to be optimal. For both defenses to be optimal, you need crazy shit to happen, right? You need defensive touchdowns for both teams. You need one team to get you like 5 or 6 sacks. You need multiple turnovers. I mean, you're really asking a lot to happen there, Thomas. The only time I can remember that being optimal was the Bills-Patriots game, and that didn't take down GPPs, but it was optimal in cash, and it was near optimal in smaller field contests. I saw a few like 20 maxes, won by a lineup with 2 defenses in it. It's not your best move. I'll just say that. The 2 running back thing is a little bit more viable than that. And again, that's still a fringe outcome, right? I wouldn't be playing both running backs in the same lineup in a cash lineup. I wouldn't be doing it in my big single entry where I'm putting a lot of my exposure behind it. But if I'm playing 150 lineups and I'm playing it with more of a portfolio approach, I'd be okay with taking 7% of my lineups with both of those running backs together. And I think that makes sense, right? The defenses, though, not so much so. I think that's a little bit too out there. Excuse me, boys. The good old throat is give me there. Meant to say any thoughts. Gotcha. So any thoughts on them? Gotcha. So yeah, I think you joined in just after I touched on it, but I'll give you the Spark Notes version. All good there. So I like him. He's 11 grand. He's okay at captain, but he's super chalky too. He's a little bit over 40% at the flex spot. He's well over 10% at the captain position. So he's getting a lot of attention. So I like Jamar Chase. It's just that everyone else does too. So if you're going to play a Bengals heavy lineup or a Bengals heavy player pool, I think he probably has to be in your player pool. But if you're considering going with a Dolphins heavy pool, then maybe you fade Jamar Chase based on ownership, right? So if you're taking 2 stacks and you want to invest into Tyreek Hill, potentially even Jalen Waddle together and those sort of builds, then you're not going to be getting too much Jamar Chase. So I think it depends on the kind of lineups that you're making, right? Because you got to be correlating your lineups. You got to be thinking about stacking when it comes to playing in Showdown. I like them because I'm playing Bengals heavy lineups, but if I wasn't, I'd hate them tonight, right? So I guess it depends. That's my answer there. It's a little bit of a cop out, but that's for sure. Bridge says a 70-point total would be amazing. It would be, right? But we can't count on it. See, that's the thing, right? Like it would be great. We'd love to see a game like that, but we can't count on it or bet like that's going to happen, right? So it's kind of la la land, right? You get what I'm saying there. It would be nice though. It'd be a heck of a game to watch. Jeffrey says Miami defense tonight or 49ers defense for this week's matchup. Let me check on who the 49ers are playing again. I should know this off the top of my head, but I don't. A little bit embarrassing. My bad. Let me look it up. Let me give you a true answer. So 49ers are up against, where are they? Oh, they're on Monday night. That's why I didn't know. I would know it if it was on the main slate, right? Because I've started my main slate projections. Haven't looked at Sunday Night Football yet either, which is actually Tampa Bay and Kansas City. That'll be a heck of a game. But going against the Rams, ooh, you have two tough matchups there, man, right? You got the 49ers against the Rams, then you have Miami tonight. Can you pick up anybody else? I mean, if you're in a season-long league, Jeffrey, I would probably drop Miami and try and pick up a defense that's playing a cupcake matchup, because at least for me, when I'm playing defenses, especially for my season-long leagues, you can pick up anybody week to week and kind of get the job done. I mean, there's always going to be that cupcake team like Jets, right? We thought the Falcons were going to be that team this year, but they actually look a little bit better than I thought they were going to be. That's for damn sure. But you're always going to be able to find that team to pick on, right? Sometimes it's an injury to a quarterback. You're able to play against that team. I would probably pick somebody up. That's what I would say. I don't love both defenses. They got tough matchups. That's what I'll say. Nick says, I'm new to this, so yell at you if you need to. Could you run a 5-1 Bengal stack, but put the one player from Miami at captain? Yes, you can. So that's kind of what I was hinting at before. I don't think I explained it well enough, though, is even if I'm going with a Bengals heavy lineup, I'm okay with taking Tyreek Hill at captain because Jalen Waddle is banged up. And there's a legitimate chance that Tyreek Hill, even in a losing game, scores 35 points, right? Because he can post 100 yards, like 10 catches. I mean, you saw that last time out, right? He had like 190 yards and 10 catches a few weeks ago, and you're over 40 fantasy points. Now that Jalen Waddle isn't going to be getting 40 himself, because even when Tyreek scored 40, so did Jalen Waddle, I could very well see him just getting all of the targets tonight, getting all of the fantasy points. Yeah, man. Definitely with Tyreek Hill, too. So I don't know what player you were considering. I definitely wouldn't do Tua, right? So Tua as a quarterback, I would not put him at captain because, if you're playing him, you got to play some of his wide receivers too. But yeah, like a Tyreek Hill, a Chase Edmonds, you could do that sort of thing. And I think it makes sense. So yes, the answer is yes there. And it's not a stupid question. David says, Tua, throw in 3 picks today. Yeah, I'm not even going to try and say his name. Throwing 3 picks. I'm okay with him throwing 3 picks. And if he does, that Bengals defense might be something to keep an eye on. So, especially if you're going with a Bengals heavy side, I could see that. Fat says, what's going on, everybody? What's going on, Fat Puddin'? We have Joanna says, you have Higgins in your lineup for now. Should you drop Waddle and put Chase in? You have the money for him. So you have the money for Waddle as of right. Wait, so Waddle would be more expensive, right? So you're saying I would probably keep Waddle in, right? So even though I do have my doubts about him, I'd probably keep Waddle in there. He still projects for a lot more points than somebody like Chase Edmonds. So Chase Edmonds projects for 10.1. Waddle projects for 15.2. That's a 5.1 point difference. Yeah, that's a little bit too much. And there's a $4,000 difference between their prices. You want to spend a lot of your salary. So yeah, I probably wouldn't leave the 4K on the table. That says Mixon at captain. I do like Mixon at captain. Absolutely love it, especially if you're going with a Bengals heavy stack. David says you got the Bears D on Sunday, so you need Danny Dimes to suck. Yeah, that's a good option to go with. Danny Dimes, by the way, he's probably going to throw a few pick sixes this year, so not a bad guy to try and play against. Fat Pun says Waddle or Hill? Hill for sure. Hill because he's going against Eli Apple, who's burnt toast out there, and also because Jalen Waddle is banged up. Not 100%, a little bit hampered there. So that's going to be Tyreek Hill for me all day. I think he's going to have a much better game. David says, speaking of the Bears, I can't believe they drafted Cole Kmet. Yeah, he went to Notre Dame, so I got to watch a lot of his games. I'm a Notre Dame fan in terms of college football. I went to Pitt, so obviously they're my number 1 team. But in terms of just fandom, I grew up a Notre Dame fan, so I'm a big fan there. Watched a lot of Cole Kmet. A little bit disappointing. I expected a lot more from him. So hopefully he turns it around for y'all. But yeah, man, it's been a little brutal to this point, I have to say. Patrick says, you just jumped on, so welcome in, dude. Better late than never, as they say. What's your strategy for tonight? So I'll give you the Spark Notes version, okay? What I'm playing is a Bengals heavy stack. And what I like to say about these primetime games is that there's always an edge with them because people play it as if it's going to be a competitive, high-scoring game every single time, right? It can be the Steelers-Browns, and people played that to be a competitive game, right? A lot of the ownership was skewed towards the Browns. Much like tonight, a lot of the ownership is going to be skewed towards the Bengals. You're going to see a lot more ownership towards the Cinci side, but there's still going to be enough ownership on the other team. And particularly in terms of lineup construction, you're going to see plenty of 3-3s, a ton of 4-2 Bengal stacks where they're not going all in on the type of narrative rather than 5-1 Bengals. Or even more importantly, you're never going to see a 4-2 Dolphins. You're hardly ever going to see a 5-1 Dolphins stack. If you want to get different tonight, don't play the 3-3, right? Don't play the 4-2 Bengals stack. Either go all in on the Bengals, or what I'm not doing, right? I'm going with the all in on the Bengals side. Go all in at the Dolphins, right? Take a 4-2. You don't even have to be as aggressive if you do that, right? If you go and take 4 players on the Dolphins as opposed to 4 players on the Bengals, that's what sort of construction is going to be a lot more rare. So that's the general strategy, right? So like it depends on what you think. If you think the Dolphins are going to win, then definitely play the 4-2 Dolphins stack or play the 5-1 Dolphins stack. If you're on the boat as I am, where you think that even though the Bengals are chalky tonight, you still think they're going to go out there and win, then just maybe be a little bit more aggressive about it, right? I mean, you can play the 4-2, you can play the 3-3 all you want. It's just going to be really hard to be unique tonight. And anytime we're trying to get leverage on the field, lineup construction is one of the easiest ways to do so. So that would be the Spark Notes version there, Patrick. It is all on replay, though, so you can definitely see it there. Super Saiyan says you have Higgins, Devontae, Olavi, Patterson. Oh, my gosh. You have a bunch of sick wide receivers, dude. That is quite the team. Maybe it's a 10-team league, which would make a little bit more sense, but that's quite the wide receiver core. Who should you have as your wide receiver 1 and 2 in your flex? All right, let me think about it. Dude. That's a good question. I mean, Devontae, we know that he's going to be in there. So he's your wide receiver 1. Done, right? Devontae. No, it's Devontae Smith. That's not Devontae Adams. Never mind. Because you would have listed Devontae Adams first. Patterson at flex, right? And then you're going to take 2 wide receivers here. So you're going to put Patterson at flex for sure because he has the most stable workload out of all the players there. I think you want to lock in those points if possible. And if I had to pick 2 wide receivers, Higgins with his matchup tonight, I like quite a bit. So I think that he's one of the 2 wide receivers that you'd have to take. And then you're choosing between, in my opinion, you're really choosing between Devontae Smith, Chris Olave, and Jerry Jeudy. So let me look at their matchups real quick. So let's see. Jerry Jeudy, he's playing, it's a horrible game in the afternoon, if I remember correctly. Yeah, he's playing the Raiders. It's a relatively high total game. The Raiders are 0-3 to this point, so you can kind of pick on them. I kind of worry about the Saints. Jameis has not been very effective, particularly because he's playing injured at this point. So maybe avoid Olave. And who was the last wide receiver? Devontae Smith. So you have the Eagles. The Eagles are playing. I'm blind. I swear it's probably on the screen. I just can't see it. They play this week. Yeah, they have to. They play the Jacksonville. That's a tough matchup because Jacksonville's a hard defense to really gauge at this point. They've had a lot of bright spots. They've also gone torched a little bit too. I would definitely go with Patterson at flex. We know that. Higgins, you're starting. And I would go Jerry Jeudy. I would go with those 3 players. But it's close. If you want to end up taking somebody like Devontae Smith, I think it makes sense too. But that's the way that I'm leaning there for you. David says Komet has more invisible than Monte Teo's girlfriend. Yeah, Monte Teo's girlfriend. That was quite the saga, huh? David says, I felt that way. I felt like I had way more fun watching the NFL when you didn't play fantasy. Hey, there's something to that, dude. If you ever feel that way, just by the way, this is a PSA to everybody out there. If you ever feel that way about sports, then don't play fantasy for the next slate. And if you have more fun enjoying it without the fantasy, then maybe that speaks volumes, right? So if you feel that way, dude, try it out. Maybe you will. I know for me personally, I like playing fantasy. It's half the reason I like watching sports to begin with. So I probably can't empathize with you too much there. But hey, if you're leaning that way, then definitely check it out. At least try it out, right? I mean, you might be wrong. I might realize, hey, I can't even watch this shit if I don't have bets on it. But hey, maybe that's the case too. Bridgeline says, any value at the very bottom? Yeah, we'll talk about them. We're going to get down there a little bit. Patrick says, makes sense to you. Thanks for the crib notes. Of course, I got you. Of course, right? Got to give you the Spark Notes version. And you missed the O in Oakland, fries and 40s at 3 a.m. Yeah, man, the O over there, especially those fries, they got rid of that down there. It's a shame, but freaking O fries, especially at 3 a.m. I got Cajun seasoning on them too, Patrick. I don't know if you ever got the Cajun seasoning. It's I don't know, makes them even better in my opinion. Nick says, word around here is the red water pistol is starting. Yeah, that's what I'm thinking too, right? So they might not even use Jameis. Freaking Andy Dalton's even worse. Oh boy. Let's honestly, I hope they start Jameis. I think he's a lot better for Chris Olave than Andy Dalton, because Andy Dalton is an absolute shit show. That's for damn sure. That point says Chase or Hill pick. That's going to be, it's so close. And thank you, Robert. I did see that. Thank you. Yeah, we'll touch on that in a second. Thank you. That's close, man. It depends on who you're stacking. If you're talking about in the season-long league, choosing between the two players, I would take Tyreek Hill. So even though I project him for less points here, because of Jalen Waddle being hurt, I think he has a higher floor than somebody like Jamar Chase, because Jamar Chase is still competing with targets with the Higgins. He's also competing with targets with the Tyler Boyd. Like I mentioned earlier, Tyreek Hill, without 100% Jalen Waddle, he's competing with targets with Gesicki. He's competing with targets with now no Cedric Wilson. So it's going to be Trent Sherfield out there. Yeah, I would definitely take Tyreek Hill. It's close, though. If you're talking about in a stacking sort of fashion, then obviously take whatever team you're stacking. That would be the easy answer there. Robert says Wilson is out, though. So we were waiting on that. That's important news. That helps us a little bit with value down low. So he was questionable, game time decision. Now we've got Trent Sherfield at $1,400. He's the next man up. But I think something to consider here is that Durham Smythe is also going to see a little bit more usage. You can see Alec Ingold used a little bit more on the red zone, especially when they get down to within the 5-yard line. Because you have to think, right? Cedric Wilson, he's seeing a few number 1 snaps when he's in practice because he's their number 3 wide receiver. So he has to be prepared on the goal line in case they decide to use a 3 wide receiver set. And that's not going to happen that often, right? Trent Sherfield does not practice with the number 1s. I can guarantee you that. He has no reps in the red zone. And I can almost guarantee you, if they get into the red zone, they don't use a 3 wide receiver set. I don't want to say I guarantee that he doesn't play in the red zone within the 5-yard line, but if Waddle's in the game and he's not banged up, can pretty much guarantee that's going to be the case, right? And if he's not playing, that means that Alec Ingold almost certainly will be, right? Him or a Durham Smythe if they go with a 2 tight end set there. So these players now, rather than a Trent Sherfield, actually are the ones that I'm going to be going after, because everyone's going to see that news and go, oh, Trent Sherfield, right? Wide receiver 3. No, honestly, if you've seen the 49ers before, if you've seen Kyle Juszczyk out there, right? You remember him, right? Scoring all those damn touchdowns on the goal line. Oh, who was their offensive coordinator? Oh, the coach of the Dolphins right now, right? So hopefully people don't come around to this. I'm hoping that I'm one of the only people that's figured this out at this point, but it's a massive edge. These fringe players, like an Ingold, who's a fullback, by the way, he's not even a running back, if anyone didn't know. Durham Smythe. Let's see, who else could we even consider? I guess that's really it, those sort of players. I think that they're going to get a little bit more usage and are probably going to play a lot more in the red zone. I mean, Mike Gesicki becomes an even better red zone target at this point. You might even see 2 running back sets where they're playing both Chase Edmonds and Raheem Mostert at the same time. You're going to see some wacky stuff tonight from the Dolphins. So, the instant reaction here would probably be to go and play Trent Sherfield, which I still think he's in play, right? He's still going to be in my player pool. But the guys that I think see the biggest boost here are the guys that are going to see the field more, right? Because they're not going to go with those 3 wide receiver sets when it gets down to crunch time. So, Sherfield, I guess it's kind of like me taking a shot at him, but I think it's well-deserved, right? He hasn't really done shit at this point of his career. So definitely something to consider. Let's talk about a few other value picks. So we talked about the kickers, which I think are fine in a high-scoring game, especially if you're taking an onslaught. Going down to the guys at the pure bottom, Salvin Ahmed last year. He saw touches, right? So now you got McDaniel in there. He's going to do his own thing on offense. We have no idea if Salvon Ahmed's even going to see the field. To this point, he hasn't, but he's been active for quite a few games. So if he's active tonight, maybe you take him if you're playing 150 lineups. You take him in like 5 lineups. But if you're playing in a 2 to 3 max, a 20 max, he's probably not a part of the picture. Mitchell Wilcox, backup tight end for Cinci. Not going to see that many snaps, but he has at least played over the first few weeks. So if you're looking for a flyer pick there, we know that tight ends and showdown primetime matchups tend to find their way into the end zone a lot more than they should. Mike Thomas, a wide receiver 4 for the Cincinnati Bengals. It's probably going to take an injury for him to get into the lineup. Chris Edmonds, who's the 3rd running back for the Bengals. If there's a injury to Samaje Perine or to Joe Mixon, he will likely see some work, but if not, he's not going to play very much. So, like I said, Alec Ingold, I like a little bit. I like Cedric Wilson. Well, not Cedric Wilson, sorry, Durham Smythe. And then I like Sherfield. That's the one I meant to say there. But not as much as a Smythe, not as much as an Alec Ingold, not as much as it Mike Gesicki now, right? So that's something that I think also helps out a little bit of Gesicki in the red zone. So thank you for letting me know about that injury news there, Robert. It changes the slate quite a bit there, particularly in the red zone, because I don't see them using much Sherfield in the red zone. Just there's a lot of nuance, right? Particularly when you're running an offense like McDaniel that's so motion oriented. You have guys running jet sweeps on every single play. It's a lot about misdirection, deceiving the other team and all of that. If you're not practicing and trying to execute those plays with the first team offense, you're going to see a lot of rust there. And when you're in the red zone, you cannot afford to have missed execution, right? You got to go out there and get the job done. I don't know if he's going to trust him in that sort of scenario. Let's go over to Draftkings now. We're going to talk through some of the strategy. So let me go ahead and share my screen, get this thing rolling here. Let's bring up Draftkings. And I'll touch on any questions that we have before we do this too. So let's see what's going on. Sydney Thunder says there is also Craycraft in the mix. I believe he's inactive. So the word with Craycraft is that he was taken down to the practice squad. They're saying, oh, they are going to sign him to their active roster. The last report I saw on this was that he had no more ways to go to the active roster, that he was out of options. I mean, in fact, let me show you this right here, right? Craycraft is not eligible for any more elevations from Miami's practice squad, right? So, like, how are they going to elevate him unless they sign him for the entire year and gave him like an actual contract? I don't know. All right, I need to see, can somebody get confirmation on whether he's active or not? Because from my understanding, he wasn't even eligible to be active tonight. Based on a lot of the reports that I was seeing. And if he is active, great. I guess that makes quite a bit of sense, but I was not entirely sure that was possible, to be quite honest with you. Nick Mars says, would you take a shot on Bridgewater in case Tua gets knocked out, in case he's banged up? I would not. No, I think that's a little bit too much of a fringe outcome. CJ says they had an open spot on the active roster. Yeah, I know they did, right? But in order to bring somebody from the practice squad up to the active roster, it's kind of like in Major League Baseball. When you have options on players in the minor league baseball, you can't unlimited move them up and down. You have a maximum, I believe in baseball, it's twice in the same year that you can move a player from AAA up to the major leagues. And in the NFL, from my understanding, because they said this exact report right here, right, is ineligible for any more elevations. Pretty sure you have 3 on the year, right? So they activated him from the practice squad for week 1. They did it for week 2, and then they did the same thing for week 3. And then on Monday, they deactivated him to the practice squad after. The only way that they can actually put him on their team right now is if they give him a full-on contract, like brand new contract, I believe. So we'll have to see. I need somebody to confirm that because I'm not just going to trust somebody in chat, to be quite honest with you. I need to see a tweet or something because from my understanding, he's not even eligible. And if he is eligible, something happened to change that. So exactly. They had to bring him out the whole season. That's we're going to have to get like confirmation that happened. Like I haven't seen that yet. It says they're slated to sign him. Like they have to actually do that before I'm going to play him tonight, right? So if anybody can get word on that, that'd be great. But I mean, let me bring it up on my end here. 1 second. Let me see if I can even find that news because I feel like it's not up. By the way, River Craycraft, if you ever try to find news on River Craycraft, easiest thing to do in human history because no one's going to have the name River Craycraft. I can guarantee you that. Let's see. Has he been signed in the last hour? The Miami Dolphins, it's saying that he's active tonight, so apparently they have to have signed him. I don't see any news about his actual contract length, but on the Dolphins website itself, as of 2 hours ago, it says that he was activated for tonight. So that means they have to have signed him. So I'm going to assume that he is going to play tonight. So that makes me like Trent Sherfield even less now. And the role that I just mentioned for somebody like Trent Sherfield is almost entirely going to go to River Craycraft now, right? So Cedric Wilson Jr. being out of the mix, that's not as impactful now. And River Craycraft has scored 2 touchdowns to this point. So the whole point I was making about Trent Sherfield not being equipped to be in the red zone is now fixed, right? It's rectified because River Craycraft, they've used him in the red zone 2 times over the first 3 weeks. So not nearly as excited about Alec Ingold anymore. Not nearly as excited about a Durham Smythe now. I still think that they're fine value plays. They'll see a lot of usage during the game. Maybe a little bit less in the red zone now that somebody like River Craycraft is in the mix. But what? Craycraft is $3,400, correct? Correct me if I'm wrong. Let me see. Yeah, he's relatively cheap. He's even cheaper, $2,400. And it was something with a 4 at the end there, $2,400. He's super cheap. You can use him as a value pick, and he's not going to have much competition anymore with somebody like a Cedric Wilson Jr. I forgot I was going to share the wrong screen here, boys. My bad. I was over here on Draftkings thinking that you were following along. My bad. But here we are in Draftkings. Let's talk through a few lineups. So let's go through how I'm thinking when I'm building or hand building a single entry type of lineup. So in this sort of build, rather than a large field GPP, when I'm in a single entry that only has 200, maybe 1,000 entries that I'm competing against, ownership isn't that important to me. I'm more just trying to build a lineup that's correlated and that, at least in terms of median projection, isn't dog shit, right? Like, it doesn't have to be the optimal build. We're not building a cash lineup here, right? But I'm going to make sure that the lineup at least makes sense, right? I'm not going to play 2 running backs from the same team. I'm not going to play 2 defenses or both kickers in the same lineup. I'm not going to go overboard with any of my correlations. So let's go ahead and build a Bengals stack for this. And I'm going to start with T. Higgins at captain. He gives us a little bit more flexibility. The next logical option is Joe Burrow, right? Obviously, when you're taking a wide receiver at captain, you typically want to pair up the quarterback with him. I want to take Ja'Marr Chase, but it is going to come with quite a bit of cost. And more importantly, I want Tyreek Hill as my buyback. So I'm going to choose to take Tyreek Hill over Ja'Marr Chase here and rather be a little bit cheaper with my stack. And then most namely, go with a Joe Mixon. So Joe Mixon, even with a T. Higgins at captain, could still end up getting into the optimal at flex. He scores a touchdown, gives you a little bit of usage out of the backfield. Both of those things would be conducive to getting to that sort of build. And at this point, we already have 3 Bengals players. We only have 1 Dolphins player. It's very obvious that we should go with either a 4-2 Bengals stack or something like a 5-1 Bengals stack. And if this were for a large field GPP, I would want to go with the 5-1 Bengals stack. For all the reasons I talked about before, with all of the chalk coming in on either a 3-3 or a 4-2 Bengals stack. If we were playing against 100,000 other entries, I'd have to worry about that. But remember, this is for a single entry. This is for a 2 to 3 max, that sort of tournament where I'm not playing against 10 to 20,000 other people. I'm playing against, 1,000 other people. It's a lot more numbered. Duplicates aren't going to be nearly as common. So if I want to take a 4-2, I can do so. So in terms of my value here, I could take a River Craycraft, right? So talking about him, he's relatively cheap. He opens up quite a bit of salary relief. If I wanted to take Alec Ingold, I could go that direction. Now, just because I want to be a little bit safer about this, I'm going to go to a Jason Sanders. I'm going to assume that maybe they stall out in the red zone a few times. Tua's not able to get there and get into the optimal just because, maybe they stall out. He doesn't get those passing touchdowns that you need to get into the optimal. And Jason Sanders maybe kicks you 3-4 field goals. So I have him in the lineup there. And that puts us at 4,500 for our last slot. And ideally, I would like to put in a Bengals player here. And the salary is not working out very well here. So the players that we're left with just aren't great options. I'm not going to take both kickers together. I've already mentioned I don't love that sort of build, but I don't hate getting to the Bengals defense. And namely, particularly because we're taking Jason Sanders. Now, Jason Sanders is going to put points on the board, right, which is going to negatively impact the Bengals, but that also means that they're kicking more, right? They're not scoring as many touchdowns. So even though he's adding points to the board, it's also limiting their upside. So, with Jason Sanders in the lineup, we're assuming that the Dolphins probably don't score all that much tonight, especially in terms of touchdown production. And maybe they turn the ball over in the red zone a few times, right? And give the Bengals the production that they need. So I don't love this lineup, at least for a large field GPP. I think that maybe it lacks top end upside. But when you're looking to try and take down just 200 to 1,000 other entries, this sort of lineup could definitely take down that kind of contest, right? It might not be the perfect nuts, but in terms of median projection, it's giving you a high floor, which for, at least for me in single entries, 2 to 3 max sort of contests, I care about my floor, right? I'm trying to cash a lot more than I don't cash in single entries. I still want to win first place, but you don't have to be nearly as bold as you're going to be in those large field GPP sort of contests. Just to give you an idea here of how I would adapt this lineup to perhaps go out there for a large field GPP. So let's go ahead and start with this core 4 that we did before, just to show you maybe how the thought process changes here. And, a 4-2, like we did for the single entry, that's okay in that smaller field contest. But in the large field contest, particularly when we have a Joe Burrow in here, Tyreek Hill is going to be chalky. I mean, all 4 of these players are going to be like 20, 40% plus owned there at the flex or captain spot. We have to be at least a little bit cognizant about ownership, a little bit cognizant about duplicating ourselves with 10 to 20 other people, right? So I'm going to go with a 5-1 Bengals stack. I don't hate going with the Bengals defense here. And if we wanted to take Bengals kicker here and leave $1,500 on the table, this lineup is probably unique, right? Because we're leaving a good amount of salary on the table. It's a 5-1, which even though we're taking the chalky side, isn't going to be nearly as popular as a 4-2 or a 3-3. And we're not taking both quarterbacks, right? So it'd be just as simple here and try and spend up here from the Bengals defense, right? So instead of taking $3,200, go, oh, let's try and take another player like Raheem Mostert, or oh, let's try and take the kicker from one of the teams here that take both kickers. By spending down, just limiting ourselves a little bit and leaving a whole $1,500 on the table and going with a 5-1 stack, it gives us a little bit of differentiation, right? That's the main thing that we're getting by doing that sort of change, but it doesn't impact our bottom line that much, right? Like the Bengals defense isn't going to project that much lower than Jason Sanders, right? I mean, let's look at the projections. Let's give you an idea, right? So Bengals defense tonight, I project for 6.8 points. Jason Sanders, I project for 8.1 points. So by going down to somebody that's $600 cheaper, right, in the Bengals defense, we're giving up a 1.3 point projection. But you're going to tell me I duplicate myself with 5 times less people? I mean, that's worth it all day, particularly because it correlates, right? Because we're already taking a full Bengals side. This lineup now is playing an actual game script that can happen, right? Whereas, taking somebody like Jason Sanders here, this sort of outcome can certainly get to the optimal. It's just based on how much it's going to be duplicated, it's not worth it. So that's the kind of thought process that we're going with. Need to leave a little bit of salary on the table. Try and take a 5-1 if you're going to take this chalky Bengals side. And if you're thinking about building a Dolphins heavy stack, let's talk through that too. Because I know a lot of people out there, right, are obviously going to be on the Dolphins side. Let's see what we got. So let's stack using Tyreek Hill, who I think is the obvious option there. If you're taking Tua, you're probably taking, if you're taking Tyreek Hill, you're probably playing Tua too. Got a little bit ahead of myself there. And let's use Jamar Chase as the buyback. So I think the clear option as a buyback is either Jamar Chase or a T. Higgins. If you wanted to be a little bit more unique, right, take pretty much anybody else. You could take Tyler Boyd if you wanted to, Hayden Hurst. But let's be a little bit more chalky about it and think through ownership a little bit more than usual. So we've got our buyback option. We've got our 2 premium options for the Dolphins stack. And now let's think through the value. So let's take Hayden Hurst. I love taking River Craycraft in this sort of lineup. So now we have 2. Hayden Hurst. I think I clicked the wrong one. It was Mike Gesicki. I meant to hit there. Sorry, boys. Hit the wrong plus sign there. So we got Mike Gesicki in there. We've got 3 pass catchers along with 2 of there. Obviously, the Jamar Chase buyback. And we're left with $6,000, which is actually a little bit more salary than I was accounting for. Let's go ahead and put Raheem Mostert in there. So a lot of people would probably just try and click in Hayden Hurst, would go, oh, let's make it a 4-2, right? Let's go with 4 players from the Dolphins, 2 from the Bengals, use a little bit more of our salary. This lineup probably at least going to be duplicated 5 to 10 times. Whereas if you go from Hayden Hurst down here and go with a full-on Dolphins onslaught, this lineup is probably unique, right? Because it has the money on the table. It's a full onslaught lineup. And sure, let's see the projection difference, right? So Hayden Hurst, actually, I believe it's the opposite way. It's just funny about this one. Yeah, Raheem Mostert projects for 9 fantasy points. I have Hayden Hurst for 9.3, right? So it's a 0.3 point difference. Do you think that 0.3 point difference in terms of your optimal rate is going to be worth duplicating yourself 10, 15 times or getting, negative leverage because Mostert's lower owned than somebody like a Hayden Hurst? Like, no, right? Obviously, if you're in a Dolphin stack here, putting those 0.3 points on the table and just throwing them away is probably the thing to do. So that's the thought process when going through a large field GPP. Let's catch up on chat, see what's going on. Let's see. Bridge says, do you like Nixon more than so Mixon, you're saying, more than Higgins? It's close. Honestly, if I'm playing Joe Burrow, I like Higgins a little bit more because they're positively correlated together. But if I'm going with a really heavy lineup in terms of Bengals players, I really like Mixon. So if you're talking about a buyback, I like Higgins more. If you're talking about a Bengals heavy lineup, I like Mixon more. Sway says, yeah, Craycraft's signing was reported like 3 hours ago. Okay, interesting. And Tom says, great content. You're a sharp. Thanks, man. Thanks for stopping by, Tom. Hopefully you're having a great night too. So we talked through some of the builds here. Let's go over to Prize Picks now. So let's bring that up. In terms of Prize Picks props, this Tyreek Hill over, I absolutely love it. So 75.5 yards. I think it's moved up a little bit throughout the week. I slammed it earlier on Tuesday, but I absolutely love it, especially with Jalen Waddle a little bit hurt here. He's at 67.5, which a lot of people have talked about taking the over there, but if he gets hit the wrong way, could end up going down. So I just prefer getting to Tyreek Hill. In terms of receptions prop? Yes, it was reception prop. I don't hate getting to a few guys here, but most notably, the receiving yard prop for Joe Mixon, I believe is 18.5 the last time that I checked it. Where are you at, Joe Mixon? 21.5. Dang, they bumped it. I think they bumped both of these. So I had Tyreek Hill over and Joe Mixon over. They bumped both of them. Those were two props that I had my eye on there. But also the reception prop for a few of these Bengals. So T. Higgins at 5, Jamar Chase at 5. I think both of them make quite a bit of sense. I ended up betting the Jamar Chase a little bit more than the T. Higgins, but I think that both of them have a extreme amount of push equity. But these two props are the ones I like the most. And unfortunately, both of them got bumped. So I guess is what it is there. I guess that's going to happen from time to time with these NFL props. But still, even at their new numbers, I think there's quite a bit of value there. And the main reason I like this Joe Mixon prop is I was looking at the receptions list here. We have Joe Mixon for 3 receptions, right? 3 receptions, 21.5 yards. He was at 18.5 yards before. And the guy averages like 9-10 yards a catch, right? And if you're projecting him 3 receptions, you're projecting him for like 27 to 30 receiving yards. So even at 21.5 receiving yards, I do think it makes quite a bit of sense there. In terms of a few other props, I mean, the passing yard overs are always something that people want to take, but they're usually negative EV plays. I do think this is a similar type of situation where, sure, they could go over their passing yard prop, but there's a reason why they're only at 275. There's a reason why they're only at 256. They've been absolutely raking in on these passing yard props all year with people taking overs on them. So I don't know if I'd be getting there myself. In terms of the rushing yard prop, I considered taking Raheem Mostert early in the week, but he was lower than 38.5. He's seen a little bit of action on the over. It seems like a lot of people think this might be the week that Mostert goes out there and gets a little bit of usage. So probably a little bit late to the party to take an over on a Mostert, but I was at least considering it. Over with Fantasy Score, I always like to take a look at my projections and compare them to the ones they have here on Prize Picks because the DraftKings scoring is similar to the scoring that they have here on Prize Picks. So in terms of Joe Burrow, I do project him for 22.7 points. So I do think there's quite a bit of an edge there. Tyreek Hill projects for 17.7 points, which, believe it or not, you're right, is slightly below that number. But if you remember earlier, I think that Jalen Waddle being injured kind of gives them a little bit of a boost. And it's hard to quantify that. So my modeling doesn't account for that. I don't think Prize Picks is accounting for it either. That's half the reason I really like the Tyreek Hill over is because he's going to get so many extra targets with Jalen Waddle a little bit injured. So I don't hate taking the over on his fantasy score, right? So if you would rather take the fantasy score as opposed to going with something like the receiving yardage, I understand getting to that play, but I do prefer the yardage over the fantasy point play. But I do like both of them. I'm taking the over on both. Jalen Waddle under 17 fantasy score is an under I absolutely love. First off, right, he's there's a one fantasy score difference between Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. And look at the receiving yard prop, right? There's almost a 10-yard difference between them. Jalen Waddle was dealing with an injury at this point. So it's actually a prop that I'm leaning towards the under on. So I was considering that. In terms of some of the Bengals players, Joe Mixon over, something that I had at 16 fantasy score. Tyler Boyd over at 8. I have him projected for well over 8 fantasy points with somebody that I was considering. And towards the bottom of the board, when you're getting to like kickers and defenses, I just have no interest in making this sort of bets. They're crapshoots at the very best, coin flips at heart, right? Just things that I'm not willing to get to. That's all I've got here for the live stream, though, boys. It's gone over an hour at this point, so wasn't expecting to go this long, but hey, we had a lot to talk about here. We will be doing live streams throughout the weekend covering golf showdown, including tonight. So if you're one of those PGA DFS fans, make sure to keep an eye out for that. We'll be going live after Thursday night football. So I'm assuming probably like 11:30, maybe midnight Eastern time we'll be going live. We'll be talking up everything for round 2 there. And for football this weekend, we'll be going live on Friday evening. So 7 p.m. Eastern time, that is the time slot we're going with for the entire season. We'll be talking through every single game, getting you ready for the main slate. We'll talk through injuries, my top stacks, all of your live questions. That's a long stream. That's like an hour and a half, 2-hour stream. So feel free to come on by with any questions. Just hang out there on a Friday evening. And like I said, get prepped for the football weekend ahead. But best of luck with any lineups tonight, fellas. Any bets if you're deciding to bet on the Bengals tonight, which I think is the way to go. I hate the Bengals, boys. I'm a Steeler fan at heart, right? Steeler helmet over my over my other shoulder there. I got to remember that it's mirrored in front of me, right? When I'm looking at my own face here. Steeler fan at heart, but I do think they get the dub tonight. But best of luck, like I mentioned, guys, and I'll catch you guys next time.